Alright, so today is the 27th of April of 2017. I'm going to be conducting an interview on my great-uncle, Jim Vandagriff, a World War II vet who lives in Calgary, Colorado, to get his viewpoint on the war. So, to get started, where were you born? Or when?
In Artesia, New Mexico, July 10th, 1926.
Alrighty. How did you get into the military?
Drafted. I got a letter from President Roosevelt sending me greetings and then telling me to report.
What branch were you drafted into?
Our infantry. Actually, you don't know whether you're going to be in the infantry all the time, because after you finish your basic training, they let you choose and then they tell you what you're going to do. So I chose paratroopers, and instead of that I stayed in the infantry.
Okay. What was your rank?
I was just a lowly private all the time.
What was your job? What did you, do?
I was, well, after I was overseas, I was just a rifleman. And then they gave me a BAR because nobody else wanted it. That's automatic rifle. And I carried it for a while. I wanted all the firepower I could get.
How did you, in the story you tell, how did you feel when you boarded the USS General John Pope, knowing that you were going across seas?
You just accept it. You don't really, at least no one that I talked to ever had it, they tell you what you're going to do and there it is. But we were up north of San Francisco, up the Sacramento River, a little town called Pittsburgh, California. And we got on this paddle wheeler, and there were a lot more besides us that's already on the board ship. And we went down into San Francisco Bay and got on the transport. Had a meal and took off. Lost that meal before I lost sight of the bridge.
Also in the story, it says that you traveled to Manila Bay in the Philippines, then took a train north in the mountains. What was the name of the company you were assigned to?
The what?
The company you were assigned to.
It was 25th Infantry, 35th Division, and D Company, and 3rd Squad. And that was up in the Belady Pass. Actually, we laughed about it at that time. There was a cartoon they called a Tunaville Trolley in the papers, and that's what we call this little old train. It was a narrow gauge, and it was loaded with troops. And it was kind of, things were different. We had seats made out of bamboo, just kind of bench type seats. And we rode it for a while, and then we got on a truck and went a little farther, and then we got in the foot back the rest of the way. And after that, it was mostly footwork.
Did your squad, or I'm not sure what it's called, have a certain name, title?
No, just a number.
Okay. Earlier, when we were talking, you mentioned Tropic Lightning.
Oh, that was the whole division.
Okay.
25th Division. That was the nickname, was a Tropic Lightning. And the emblem, I can send one of the things home with you. The insignia, the shoulder patch, and it was the outfit was organized in Hawaii, and never been stateside as a division. And this insignia it's a leaf off of some tropical tree, and I couldn't tell you what kind. I know what it looks like at all. But I'll give you one of the little deals I've got that goes on a cap or whatever before you go home. And that was our shoulder patch for the whole division.
Okay.
There's 3 battalions. I was in the 35th Battalion, and then they have the 27th and the 161. And they're together as a division in a way, but at that time we mostly just individual squads. And I was in or not squad, but platoon. And I can't even remember the name of the platoon, but I remember we dug us a hole apiece on the side of this mountain. And by the time I got over there, most of the jungle was on the ground. We just had trails. It was through the jungle, but most of it, the artillery and the bombing and stuff had put it on the ground. And we had trails through that. We booby-trapped all of them. We'd tie a hand grenade to a tree, put a wire in it. We had communication wires. And we'd pull the pin on the grenade almost out, then string it across the path and tie it to a tree. So if somebody tried to sneak up on us in the night, why we'd at least hear the grenade go off and have that much warning, you know. I remember it was funny, the guy that, I forget now, I can't hardly even remember the names of the things, but he was a guy that was in charge of the radios and stuff, and the communications actually is sort of a telephone deal. And he strung the wire and everything, and his wire had got severed, and he was looking around, and one of the guys is really laughing about it because he'd trying to get through and he couldn't get communication back to the behind the lines, and he'd hooked onto one of our, it wasn't set, but it was one of our booby trap wires. He'd hooked onto that. He wasn't getting any communication out of that. But, you know, you gotta laugh at some of the things. Really not funny, but still, you gotta. We laughed at a lot of things that really wasn't funny. There was caves. I mean, there'd be a cave along the side of the hill and a half a dozen openings. And there's one Japanese soldier kept my outfit held up for almost all one day, going from one hole to another. And they finally got a grenade in him. And by the time I got over there, those holes were full of dead Japanese. Most of our boys were accounted for, but I've often thought about it. There were so many of them. Now they wouldn't do it. You wouldn't be allowed to do it. But then they just started taking prisoners. And this was within 3 months of the end of the war. Wouldn't want to do it again.
So while you were in the Philippines, did you engage in any battles?
And what?
Any battles?
Mostly just, we'd go out just on patrols. There was really not a whole lot of organized fighting by then by the Japanese. It was just small bunches, hid out, you know, and sniping and stuff like that. But just before we went up on the line, we had a sniper shot at some trucks. And one of the truckers grabbed his rifle and shot back, and then they came and they sent us out on patrol to find the sniper, and he was already wounded when we got there. And we didn't bring him back. You were taught to do things that they wouldn't allow even in battle now. But, I didn't like the news media later. I think a lot of people think that Japanese or German would be our main language nowadays if we had the news coverage then that we have now. Because when they bombed Pearl Harbor, they pretty near wiped out our whole Pacific fleet. And they had to rebuild it before. And, that ship we were on, it's hard to realize that troop transport we went over on. There was 5,000 troops and 500 officers, besides the sailors and the Marine Guards. They had Marine Guard, 2 or 3 of them stationed around or more. I don't know how many. I just saw 2 or 3 because you didn't. That many men, you didn't do a lot of moving around. Just come up on deck and go below. And every time we had a warning, why, they sent us down below. And I often thought, boy, if they send a torpedo, I don't be right down underwater.
Did it stop?
And, we stayed there for a while before we went up.
In Manila Bay?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was just out of Manila, out south of Manila somewhere. And they decided where we were going, you know, from there. And years later, I ran onto a fellow that I buddied around with in the States. I never saw him after he got overseas. And we got to talking naturally, and he said, you know, he'd been a heavy equipment operator. And he said, they put me on a cat, and he said, I rode that darn cat the whole length of that island. I said, I sure feel sorry for you. I walked that thing. I did, and I got a ride on the train for a little ways. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's good. While you were in the Philippines, can you tell us about being pinned down there?
Well, we really weren't. I don't know where Doug got that idea. We had, when I first went up on the lines, I know I had a partner in a foxhole, a guy that was from there at Carlsbad, New Mexico, from there. And his hole was pretty shallow, and I enlarged it and deepened it a bunch. And this friend of mine was assistant machine gunner, and I was right next to him. And our holes were maybe 10 foot apart. I was sitting up on the edge of it. We was visiting back and forth, and I looked around and I said, "Where'd everybody go?" He said, "You hear that artillery?" I said, "Yeah, that's our 155s, isn't it?" "No." He said, "That's Japanese artillery just over the hill." I just like a squirrel, man. I went in that hole in a hurry. But they didn't quite get as far as we were. But there was, when we were back, after they called us, we went back for, I think we were back for about a week. And then we were loading up to go back to where as far as the trucks would take us. We'd go on a hike the rest of the way. And it was on a hill overlooking that little barrio of Santa Fe. And we had this, we were kind of on the back side of this hill and had a trench that went up and then turned right short. And we had a 155 mounted on a half track. And every so often, why, they'd run it up that trench and then go over, and had a good range of fire below there. And when we went back for a rest, and then we went back, started to go back up, they were loading us up again on the trucks, and they started calling names. And my name was one of them. They said, "You stay here." I handed my BAR to an old boy I took basic training with, a great big husky guy named Roller. And he just had a fit. He hated that gun with a passion. Because when you had an automatic weapon, you were pretty well zeroed in if they could, you know. And but I liked that firepower myself. And we found out then, we said, "What's the deal?" Well, Roosevelt had died, and Truman took over, and he called all the 18-year-olds back off the line. You had to be at least 19 before you could go back on the line. So we stayed back in the old men, you know, up in their 20s. He called it Boys Town. We didn't appreciate the term, but that's what they called it. And we stayed back because we had what they called the short timers. At that time, they had started sending guys home at so many points. And depending on how long you'd been there and how many battles you'd been in and everything and how many points you had. And they were the short timers. They were just waiting for a ship going back home to send them back home. And they took us out on patrols. And we did a lot of mountain climbing. There was a mountain right there close to us. And the top of it was plumb bare. It took 2 Jeeps to pull one loaded Jeep trailer up that mountain. It was that steep. And the top of it was plumb bare. And I asked someone, I said, "Why, how come there's no vegetation?" I said, "All these other mountains have got vegetation clear at the top." Well, the Japanese had a cave right on the top of that, and somewhere or other, I guess a part at a time, they were there a long time, you know, before we got back to them. And they had a big gun that rolled it out on rails, and they had a field of fire there just as far as that gun would shoot. Clear over the top of the rest of those mountains and into the canyons and valleys and stuff. And they finally skip bombed it. They zeroed the heavy artillery in on it and skip bombed it and caved the top of the mountain off into that cave and shut it off, and whoever was in it too. And you know, you hate thinking about some of that kind of stuff, but it was necessary. I had a lot of friends in that 200th. Actually, they were in reserve, and they were over there for their reserve camp, and they were in that Bataan Death March and all of that. And some of them lived, some of them died in prison camp. They were from right there, Artesia and Carlsbad, right up and down the Pecos Valley there. And one guy especially, a boy named Don Adams, he'd been pretty athletic and everything, and he had polio while he was in a prison camp. And he went to work in the bank, and he couldn't even lift a tray of coins. You'd have to have help to do it. He lived a while after he got home.
How long were you there?
Oh golly, really not very long. I turned 19. I guess I'd been there a couple of months when I turned 19. And there may be some dates on that. I don't.
March 25th to September 20th, 1945.
Aunt Levon mentioned a place called Garrison after the battle.
Oh, what?
Garrison?
Oh, it's not a place. That's where you, when the whole division went back, I call it being back in Garrison. The whole division was back for a rest. And we were camped out at this place. I talked to someone years later, and they called it Tarlac City. And you wouldn't have called it a city when we were there, but it was I mean, they had a movie theater, we'd go to picture show and things like that, and just, if we could catch a ride to town, we was out a good ways. What they called it when you went back like that, when the whole outfit went back for rest, they called it back being in Garrison. It does sound like it's a place, but it's just like when, you know, you go to town or you go somewhere. We were back in Garrison. And we were there for a little while. We played ball and didn't do anything for a while. It really just, well, we had formation, fall out for formation and take our Ativan and stuff like that. Ativan was supposedly a preventative for malaria. It was a substitute for quinine because we couldn't get quinine at that time. And I thought I was taking my Ativan pretty regular, but I still got malaria. You take that Ativan, you turn, well, I could leave my shirt off all day. I just brown as a berry and didn't blister. And it turned a plum yellow from taking that Ativan. And then when I had malaria too, they had, I never, they talked about getting yellow jaundice. That's when it's some kind of liver disease that you turn plum yellow. And I did that a few times after I got home. I'd get sick and have a setback and turn just about as yellow as that paint over there on the wall. But that's what happens when your liver goes bad, is you turn yellow.
What effect did the war have physically, just besides malaria, and on your physical and mental health?
Well, actually, after I'd been in the hospital about 6 months, when they discharged me, well, I was in as good a shape as I ever was, I guess, except if I'd have a setback of malaria, well, I'd be sick for sometimes 24 hours, sometimes 2 or 3 days, and then everything would be fine. I loafed around just because I could. I was drawing 100% disability for a good while. I loafed around and didn't do anything. I had some colts of my own that I was riding and stuff like that. Then I run on to an old boy downtown that I'd known before we went to service, before the war. And he asked me if I wanted to go out to Turkey Track and break some horses, help him break some horses. I wound up doing most of it after we got out there. I went to work breaking horses. I went to go every so often I have to go to the Veterans Hospital in Albuquerque for a physical, and I drew 100% disability for about 18 months. And it was $115, and then it was $138 was total disability. But I was working on a ranch breaking horses for $100, so I was pretty wealthy. And then they cut me back 10%, and I drew that for about 10 years. And but I don't know, at that time, and then later I got hurt pretty bad when I got kicked. That horse kicked me in the stomach. And I had an awful bad fever, and I'd have night sweats, and pretty near crapped out. I'd have 3 or 4 times. And for a long time after that, somebody would tell me something, and I'd say, well, I was just 40 years old at the time. They'd tell me something, I'd think, well, I knew that, but I'd never think of it. And then I finally got kind of back square with the world after a long period of time. Started remembering things that I should have known and I had known before. But I didn't really blame it on the Army. Then the hospital it's unbelievable how terrible people can be and live. And they wouldn't have lived in World War I with the way some of these guys were. I went down for a blood test one day. A fellow came in there, had no ears, no nose. His face was nothing but a scar. Had a full head of hair. And you don't quiz a guy. And I always figured he was probably in the Air Force and had a helmet on. There's a reason he didn't lose his hair. But his hands, his fingers just came out to points, had no fingernails on any. His hands are just stubs. You'd see a guy with his arm up like this, taking a piece of skin and making him a new ear. Things like that. And they're even doing better than that nowadays. Boy one time was talking about what he wanted out of the service. He said nothing but out.
What was your most memorable experience while there?
Oh boy. I guess the fun times when I was over there. One thing I can remember, and that it was the most fun, I guess, was out on patrol, and we come to this little stream, and it ungodly hot. And I don't know how the water got so blooming cold, but those streams, that water was pretty cold. It come out of high mountains, you know. And I remember we posted guards, and the rest of us had a nice swim. And this creek, it wasn't, oh, it was as wide as this room is, maybe from there to here. And it was running pretty fast, and it went down against this bluff and made a sharp turn. And right at the base of that bluff, I saw an old boy. This bluff was probably 20, 30 foot high. And he surface dived. He's built about like your dad. He surface dived and came up with a log about 10 foot long, about that big around, that was waterlogged and was on the bottom. And I asked him, I said, water pretty deep? Oh yeah, it's pretty deep all over this pool. So I got up on that bluff and dived off. And I had to swim underwater to get bottom. I don't know how deep it was, but I thought I never would get back out of it. And that guy surface dived and went to the bottom. I couldn't have held my breath that long. And you know, you remember things like that, it's fun times. And it wasn't really a lot of fun times. But I was on this ship going over, I saw this guy, and I thought, well, darn, that guy looks just like Raymond, who was a cousin of mine, the first cousin, Raymond Jonas. I thought, no, it couldn't be. I didn't even go up to him. But it couldn't be Raymond. Good night. He's married with a daughter. And we had our duffel bags lined up there on the beach there in Manila Bay, right there in Manila. And there's Raymond E. Jonas. And sure enough, I looked him up and it was Raymond. And he was killed just over a mountain from where I was. I was the last one of the family to see him. And I never did figure, I never did see his wife or daughter, you know. And both his younger brothers were in the service at one time or other. Odie's the one that got shot through the elbow, and they used to call him $1 million wound. They got to send you home. Another memorable thing that wasn't so much fun is a guy, we were in this camp they call Boys Town with 18-year-olds. One of these boys had found him a 7mm Japanese automatic pistol. And he was showing it around, you know, and one old kid took it and he looked at it and jacked it back and turned it loose and shot his friend right through his shoulder. And I guess he got him to send him home, but it wasn't the way you want to go home. Man, and seeing our boys, there was a place right behind the line where they went, where they identified the bodies, you know, the guy that was killed. And I often wonder, like I was saying about the Japanese, because those caves were just full of dead bodies stacked in there just like stove wood. And I had to walk around some when I went up to join my outfit. Then one was pretty fresh. He'd tried to sneak up on this machine gun nest. And just the night before. And when the grenade booby trap went off, why, it hurt him, but it didn't kill him. They went ahead and he was laying right beside the trail. But you're not immune to that kind of stuff, but you can't let it bother you. You just will not even be there if it bothers you a whole lot. And you learned if somebody says duck, you start dodging. You don't go looking in the air for ducks flying over. And, I've seen guys get fussed at pretty strong for whistling, because that might be incoming, and you don't. They whistle when they come at you up to a certain point.
Are there any people that really stick in your mind that you have memories with, I guess?
This one fella named Frank Baker, we buddied around together just before we went overseas. And Frank was up in his 20s. And we went overseas on the same ship. I remember old Frank, he'd been working in San Francisco when he was drafted. But he is originally sheep herder from Idaho. And he had a lot of tales about being out in the mountains with his sheep. And Frank and I got to be really good buddies. I can show you his picture there in that thing there. And I never saw him anymore after we went overseas. I remember he sent home for his air mattress. And he'd blow that thing up my mouth every night. He'd sleep more comfortable than the rest of us did. But and then there was a Ed Vaughn. I knew a Ted Vaughn from rodeoing, and he was in Army same time I was. And a Ed Vaughn. Ed was a little older. Ed was the one that I run on 2 years later, talked about running a cat from one end of that island to the other. And at the end of our basic training, we had to do a lot of things. 20 push-ups in a certain length of time, a 100-yard dash, 100-yard piggyback carry, 21-mile hike, 12-mile speed march. And one thing I remember about our speed march, our sergeant had been out on a toot the night before. Man, you talk about the water running off of somebody's head, and you know he stayed right with us, but he was a hurting. And the speed march, you go with a full field pack, which is a 40-pound pack, and your rifle, which is another 8 or 10 pounds. And you march, and then you double time, and then you speed march and double time, and you try to do it within a certain mile, a certain length of time. I think it was just 6 mile we did then. 21 mile was just a march. But Ed and I buddied up, and he weighed about 200. That 100-yard piggyback carry was a little bit more than I wanted, but I got him there. He didn't have much problem with me. But you know, in that picture, I weighed about 165 pounds, and I was a loose 28 in the waist. Now I weigh about that, and I'm tight 36. you change over a period of time, you know.
Have you visited any memorials or participated in any commemorations of the war?
Not really. They just never were anywhere around, you know. Closest was in the Veterans Hospital, I guess, and it wasn't exactly a memorial, it was just there. They had World War II, World War I veterans that were in the hospital full time. And we went down to a meal after went in, got checked up that morning. I drove all night, got up there and checked me out about 8 o'clock till 10 or 11, then we had a meal and then went home. And just 250 miles. And I drove to look at it, got sleepy, and then I rested a little bit and then drove on up. And I saw a special meal. And here come these old fellers, World War I veterans. We got meatloaf and they got steak. But they lived there, you know, most of them. But,
where were you when the war was declared over?
pardon?
Where were you when the war was declared over?
Oh, I was about 3 or 4 days out of Manila Bay on the way home in the hospital ship. USS Dogwood. Took us 30 days to get over and 18 to get back, and we spent a day or two in somewhere in a bay I never did find out where it was. But we pulled into this bay for a couple of days, and I remember the nurses diving off the side of the ship, and some natives paddled out in their little outrigger canoe type of things, you know. And I often wondered, because some of those natives had big old sores all over their body. And I often wondered if maybe it's a quarantine deal or something. I never did find out. I know one old boy that's in my ward there in the hospital. He did the belly flopper off the ship. And I think he was going to try to swim in and stay there, something, but he's a black guy. Man, he rubbed his stomach the rest of the way home. Because it was a long ways up the deck of that darn boat or ship. The sailors, especially the officers, got a little upset if you called it a boat. I'll have you know this is a ship. This is not a boat.
What decorations or citations were you awarded?
Well, they called a entryman the rifleman's badge. Just a rifleman, I didn't make expert. But then the Good Conduct Medal and the Filipino Liberation Medal. And we were awarded the Presidential Citation, but I didn't take it. I didn't take the ribbon because I wasn't with the outfit when they earned it. And it was awarded to the whole division, even the replacements. But I didn't take it because I wasn't in on all of it. And what they did, it's 100 actual days of actual fighting. On one of the islands, I never knew whether it was Saipan or one of the islands anyway. And I don't remember what all islands they were on. That's all I can remember. I know I had some more, but I don't remember what they were.
Are there any other stories you want to tell or Sure.
Oh, not really. I talk a while and I run out of voice. I had the MRI one time and trying to get my back straightened out. And this doctor down here in Walden said, I'm a little concerned about said, I want to take a biopsy of your throat. Because he said, that bothered me as much as the sign of old fractures that I didn't even know I had. I knew I hurt my back, but you know. And they said the x-ray showed the fractures, but I couldn't feel them. It had already quit hurting by then, but it does now. And she said, it bothered me, I want to biopsy your throat. And I went in there and they kind of deadened it, you know. Then they go in there with a needle about that long. And you could feel it, but it doesn't hurt. Till they hit something in there, and it smarts severe, but you don't move. Because you don't want to be wiggling around with a needle in your throat, you know. And never hurt anything. They got through with the biopsy, and this guy, he said, well, we got to go check this out. He said, we may have to do it some more, but hopefully we won't. He said, I may not have to come back. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you bye-bye right now. He come back in and said, well, your bye-bye didn't work. We got to do it again. And we never heard a thing for, went on a month or two. And we asked Lynette, said, have you heard from them? No. Well, she got a hold of them. They said, well, it wasn't cancer. And I still never found out what it is. But my singing's a whiskey croak anymore, and I don't yodel worth a darn. Sometimes I don't even talk good.
Do you have any more questions for us?
Thank you for sharing. Thank you a lot.